On the night of December 19th, 1941, 6 Italian frogmen slipped into the most heavily guarded harbor in the Mediterranean. They were riding what the Italians called pigs, 7-meter-long manned torpedoes loaded with explosives. Their mission was suicidal. Their target was the pride of the British Royal Navy, and strapped to each of their wrists was a watch so secret that its very existence was classified by the Italian government. Those watches were made by a tiny Florentine company that almost nobody had heard of, a company called Panerai. And here's the thing. Panerai's story should have ended that night in Alexandria Harbor. Instead, it became one of the strangest rise and fall stories in the history of luxury. The story begins in 1860, when Giovanni Panerai opened a small watchmaking shop in Florence, on a bridge over the Arno River. For decades, it was nothing special, just a little workshop selling Swiss imports. But Giovanni's grandson Guido had a talent for invention. In 1916, he created a luminous compound made from radium and zinc sulfide. It glowed so brightly underwater that it caught the attention of the Italian Royal Navy, who started buying Panerai's precision instruments for their warships and submarines. And then, in the mid-1930s, the Navy came to Panerai with an unusual request. They needed a watch, but not just any watch. They needed one that could survive the deep ocean, glow in total darkness, and be read at a glance by a diver whose life depended on knowing exactly how many minutes of oxygen he had left. There was just one problem. Panerai did not actually know how to make watches, so they went to the one company that did, Rolex. The Swiss watchmaker had just invented the first truly waterproof watch case, and Panerai essentially asked Rolex to build them a supersized version. The result was a 47mm monster, nearly twice the size of a normal men's watch at the time. It was ugly by civilian standards, brutally oversized, with a stripped-down dial designed purely for function. But for the elite frogmen of Italy's most feared underwater commando unit, it was perfect. These were the men who carried out one of the most daring naval raids in history. 6 divers on 3 manned torpedoes snuck through the harbor defenses of Alexandria, Egypt, by slipping in behind British destroyers as the gates opened. One frogman, Luigi della Penne, had his torpedo's engine die in the middle of the harbor. His partner passed out from oxygen failure. So della Penne pushed a 2,000-pound torpedo by hand through the dark water, alone, all the way to the hull of the British battleship HMS Valiant. He attached the mine, surfaced, and was immediately captured. The British locked him in a compartment aboard the Valiant. By pure coincidence, it was directly above the bomb he had just planted. 15 minutes before detonation, Della Penne asked to see the ship's captain. He told him the ship was about to explode. He refused to say anything more. They sent him back to the room. When the mine went off at 6 a.m., the blast launched Admiral Cunningham 5 feet into the air on the deck of another battleship. Both the Valiant and the HMS Queen Elizabeth were crippled. Winston Churchill kept the whole disaster secret for months. But here's the part almost nobody knows. After the war, Panerai basically disappeared. The Italian military stopped ordering watches. Production dropped to almost nothing. The Panerai family line ended in 1972, when the last heir died, and a former naval engineer took over. For the next 20 years, the company existed in a kind of limbo, making a handful of instruments in a quiet workshop in Florence, entirely unknown to the outside world. In total, between 1935 and 1970, Panerai had produced roughly 1,600 watches total, ever. And that would have been the end of the story. Except in 1993, the company decided to try something radical. They launched 3 watch models for civilians, based on the old military designs. They sold in tiny numbers. The company was barely surviving. And then, Sylvester Stallone walked into a watch shop in Rome. The year was roughly 1995. Stallone was in Italy filming a disaster movie called Daylight, and he spotted a massive Italian dive watch in the window. He loved it. The oversized case fit his wrist perfectly. He bought one, then commissioned a batch of custom pieces with his name on the dial and his signature engraved on the back. He handed them out as gifts to Arnold Schwarzenegger and other Hollywood friends. When Daylight came out in 1996, Stallone wore the Panerai in every scene. Now here's the irony. Those custom watches nearly bankrupted Panerai because Stallone almost never actually paid for them. But the publicity was worth more than money. Overnight, a watch brand that had been invisible for 50 years was suddenly on the wrist of one of the biggest action stars in the world. Within a year, the luxury conglomerate Richemont swooped in and bought Panerai for approximately $1 million. They installed a former Cartier executive as CEO and began transforming this tiny Italian workshop into a global luxury brand. The timing was perfect. The late 90s and 2000s were the era of the oversized watch, and Panerai's naturally massive cases were suddenly the most fashionable thing in the luxury watch world. Celebrities wore them on red carpets. Collectors hunted for them in boutiques. By 2007, Panerai was the watch to own. Demand was so high that getting your hands on a popular model was nearly impossible. A cult-like community of online collectors formed around the brand. Prices on the secondary market were climbing. The brand had gone from making 2,000 watches a year to 70,000. And that is exactly where things started to go wrong. Because the very thing that had made Panerai special, its rarity, its secrecy, its impossible to find exclusivity, was being destroyed by the company's own success. Richemont moved production out of Florence and into a factory in Switzerland, stripping away the Italian-made story that collectors loved. They flooded the market with limited editions, so many that the word limited became meaningless. At one point, Panerai was releasing more limited edition models than regular production ones. Collectors who had paid a premium for rare pieces watched the company release near-identical versions a year later, tanking the value of their originals. Meanwhile, the oversized watch trend was dying. Wrists were shrinking. Fashion was moving toward thinner, sleeker designs. And Panerai, whose entire identity was built on being big and bold, had nowhere to go. Resale values started to collapse. Industry data shows Panerai sliding down the global watch brand rankings year after year. Secondary market prices dropped roughly 17% over 5 years. Online forums that had once worshipped the brand started asking a question that would have been unthinkable in 2007. Is Panerai dead? The answer is no. Panerai is still here. They still make beautiful watches with a genuinely incredible history behind them. But the brand that was once so exclusive you could not find one to buy is now so available that some dealers struggle to sell them at all. And there is a painful lesson in that. Panerai's military watches were legendary precisely because they were never meant to be sold. They were tools, built for a specific mission, produced in tiny numbers, and classified as state secrets. The moment they became mass-produced luxury items, they lost the very thing that made people want them in the first place. It is the oldest trap in business. You cannot manufacture exclusivity at scale. The same story has played out with countless brands, but rarely this dramatically. A watch born in secrecy, forged in war, resurrected by a movie star, and ultimately undermined by its own popularity. If you found this fascinating, hit subscribe for more stories like this.